This talk is about consumers in the smart city. And the question I want to pose is if smart cities are actually sustainable or if they are just smarter, and for whom are they smarter. So the next 15 minutes I will talk about what smart cities is. I will talk about load management in households. I will talk about some of the smart grid and smart city technologies we know as heat pumps and electric vehicles, and I will end with some questions and conclusions. So first of all, what is smart cities? Smart grids? Are these just new catchwords? Well, I think basically it is smart new catchwords. What city don't want to be smart? I mean, everybody wants to be part of that. And if you talk with people from the energy sector at the moment, they all talk about smart grids. But I actually also think that it is part of the future, and therefore I think it's important that a lot of different people take part in discussing and planning this future to come. So what is it about? It's about energy efficiency in buildings, in infrastructures, in technologies, and we have worked for that already for a long time, and we will have to work even harder on this in the coming years. I think what is more new in the smart city and smart grid approaches is that we have to link energy consumption and production much closer to each other, and I will talk more about that. And then, of course, we will have to use information and communication technology to controlling and planning and managing all this, and also managing a lot of other things in the cities. So why is it that smart grids are needed? Well, here you see an example of a household and their consumption, how it varies over the day. And as you will see, this household, this is an example, it uses much more electricity between 6 and 8 in the evening. And all the other households in the city do more or less the same. So we have a problem with households using electricity at a certain time of the day, and this means that the grid companies need to provide electricity at this time of the day also. They have to turn up the power supply. This is not very economically sound, it's not very environmentally sound to produce in this way. It would be much better if we could produce much more equally. Another problem or part of the future is that we want to have much more renewable energy into the system. I come from Denmark, we already have a lot of windmills there, but we want to have much more windmills into the system. Other places it will be sun power, but both sun and wind are there sometimes, and sometimes they are not there. So the production system starts to be varying in its production, and at the same time we have the consumption side that is varying in its production, and we need to have balance in this system. And in the future smart grid, we might be that we have to adjust consumption to production rather than the opposite around. So load management and peak shaving is part of that. This picture shows an old meter. Some of us still have them. We won't have them in the years to come. We need new meters that can have two-way communication, tell us what is going on in the household and what is going on in the production side. So this new smart meter will be the gateway between the consumer and the smart city, the smart grid. It can give feedback to the consumers, how much are you using now, and this might help the consumer reducing its consumption. It can give time-based information at what time of the day is the consumer using its electricity. If this is combined with variable tariffs, so it's more expensive to use the electricity in the peak hours, more cheap during the night, or maybe we can even have real-time pricing, so depending on how much the windmill is blowing now, the price is going down, and households can start to use more. So this is one way of having load management in the household, so consumers respond to price signals. Maybe it will work, maybe not. I'll talk more about that. But another possibility, which is also experimenting with at the moment, is that the energy producers actually are able to control the consumption in the household. So the producers can turn on and off appliances in the household. So different types of load management. In both cases, there will be a lot of data traveling between the consumer and the producer, a lot of data about what are people doing at the moment in different places. And when we have a lot of data, we also have the question about data security and who owns the data. Is the household, do they want everything to be open for everybody? Do the grid companies, they can use this for selling electricity better to the household? The city can use this for planning. So there's a lot of need for these data, but what about the security in them? If we need to have load management, then it's interesting to see how are households actually using the electricity. This example is from Denmark, where we don't use electricity very much for heat consumption. So this is all the appliances. As you see, a lot of it is used for information and communication technology. A lot of it is used for lighting. It's not very easy to ask people to peak shave on these appliances, start to use the light in the middle of the night, or use television in the middle of the night, do the cooking in the morning rather than the evening. So a lot of these appliances or these end users, it's not really able to do the peak shaving or load management. What we can do is about the washing. Well, it's possible to fill the machine in the evening and then put on automatic, or ask the companies to turn on the machine when the electricity prices go very much down. But it's only a little part of the actual electricity that we can do this with. We might store some energy when we are talking about hot waters, fridge and freezers, so the freezer can cool down more in the night when it's cheap electricity and save the heat there. But if we are really going to have leveled out the consumption, then we also need to have some new appliances and some new uses in the electricity system. And this is why we are very often hear about electric vehicles and heat pumps as part of the smart city development. We did a study 2 years ago in Denmark on heat pumps and comfort norms, and the question we asked here was, do efficient technologies always result in lower consumption? Or sometimes when the new technologies are introduced, is there also a change in practices, and by that, a change in norms of comfort? So what we found out, we were studying in this case 130 households and followed their consumption some years before and some years after they introduced the heat pump. Before they had direct electric heating, now they heated by the heat pump, which is more efficient way of heating, so we would expect reduced energy consumption. And we actually also saw a reduced consumption. However, it didn't reduce as much as we would have expected out of theoretical considerations. You could say 20% of the possible savings, they were actually used for increased comfort. From our survey and our qualitative interviews, we could tell that these households started to have higher temperatures in their houses. They started to heat larger areas. They start to have longer heating seasons, and some of them also used it for air conditioning. We also, in this study, followed summer houses. And here I think it was even more interesting what we saw. On average, these summer houses, they didn't have any reduction at all. So they bought the heat pump instead of having electric direct heating. But what happened at the same time was that they had new practices. They started, in many cases, to heat the summer house during the whole winter time. Beforehand, they would close the summer house down. Now they had the cheap energy, so they could heat it up, and that was a luxury. You can arrive in a weekend, and you can find out that it's nice to arrive there, but you don't save the energy that you were intended to save with this more efficient technology. The other project, it's a PhD student I have, and she's following test drivers of electric vehicle. This is families who volunteer to test drive electric vehicles for 3 or 6 months. And then she's following what is happening with their everyday life and their practices related to transportation. And what she found out so far is that many of these families, they start to use a car more often for the small trips, where they usually would have taken the bike or walked. Now they take the car, partly because they know that this car is not so environmentally damaging as the other car they have. It's more easy just to start for this small trip. Several of the families also indicate that they feel an increased need for a second car. So they have this second car as a part of a test, but now they start thinking about actually buying a second car, which would be an electric car. Of course, these results are preliminary, and it is based on a test project, so it's not people who actually did board and use it in their everyday life. But I think the results are indicative that maybe the same thing is happening as we saw with the heat pumps. We are having a more efficient technology, but when people start to use it, they at the same time change their practices, so they start to consume more, and we don't really have the savings which we would expect to have. So I'll use this to question smart grids and smart cities. One of the questions is, who should control the consumption? Is it the consumers or is it the suppliers? Well, as we see, we are at the moment experimented with both approaches. Also the question, who owns the data and who secure them? I think if this is introduced without actually asking the consumers, then there might be consumers who don't want to take part of this, who don't feel safe about their data, which might be private or felt like private data. You don't want companies to know about that. You don't want the cities to know about that. On the other hand, these data are very important if we want to develop the smart city approach. It's a way of monitoring what is actually going on. Do we have success with what we are doing? You need the feedback about how consumers are doing. So data is necessary, but we also need to treat them carefully. Also, the question is this realistic? I mean, I showed you how peak shaving, on one hand, is necessary. If we ask the production side, they will say peak shaving is necessary. We can't have the future system without doing this. On the other hand, this means that households have to change a lot of small practices in their everyday life. Will they actually do that? Well, I don't know if it's desirable, but if the system managers say it can't work without doing this, then it will probably be part of the future. And again, I think then it's very important that we include consumers in developing these solutions. If this should actually work in real life, then consumers need to be part of developing how it should be. And also, it's very important that consumers and everybody else focus on savings and not only about efficiency and smartness, because otherwise efficiency and smartness will always also include more consumption, and we won't actually have sustainable solutions. Thank you.